You are working. You have always been working. You show up, you put in the hours, you do what you are supposed to do, and still, at the end of the month, the numbers don't add up the way you need them to. There is always something, an unexpected bill, a price that went up, a raise that didn't come through, a plan that made sense on paper and fell apart in real life. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the frustration, a thought begins to take root, quiet, persistent, and dangerous. Maybe this is just how it is for people like me. That thought, that single quiet thought. Napoleon Hill spent the better part of his life warning us about exactly that thought. Not because he was an optimist who believed that positive thinking alone would fill your bank account, but because he had studied over decades and across hundreds of lives precisely how the mind either opens the door to financial progress or locks it shut from the inside. And what he found was both uncomfortable and deeply liberating. His warning, issued nearly a century ago, has never been more relevant than it is right now. Here is the question I want you to sit with before we go any further. If someone could hear every thought you have had about money in the last 30 days, the private ones, the ones you would never say out loud, what story would those thoughts be telling about what you believe is possible for you? Leave your honest answer in the comments. You might surprise yourself. There is a particular kind of financial pain that almost nobody talks about, honestly. It is not the dramatic crisis, the sudden job loss, the medical emergency, the catastrophic event that everyone can see and sympathize with. It is the slower, quieter pain of chronic not enough, the kind where you are not in disaster, but you are never quite free, where there is always a ceiling just above your head that you cannot name but can feel, where watching other people move forward financially produces a reaction in you that you are not entirely proud of something, between envy and a kind of defeated resignation. Napoleon Hill identified what he believed was the root cause of this experience. And it was not the economy, not the job market, not the family you were born into, though he acknowledged all of those as real. The root cause, in Hill's view, was what he called poverty consciousness, a state of mind so thoroughly saturated with the expectation of lack that it begins to function as a self-fulfilling prophecy, not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently, invisibly. The way a leak in a roof doesn't destroy a house in one night, but will absolutely destroy it over time. Hill believed that the mind, when conditioned to expect poverty, becomes extraordinarily skilled at finding evidence for it. It notices every setback, it amplifies every risk, it manufactures reasons why opportunities are not really opportunities, why success stories belong to other kinds of people, why trying harder is probably going to end in the same place as not trying hard enough. Poverty consciousness doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like clear-eyed realism. That is what makes it so difficult to escape. Think of it like a compass that has been magnetized to point south. You can walk in any direction you want. You can work hard, make plans, seek advice. But if your internal compass keeps pulling you toward limitation, you will find a way to arrive there even when you started somewhere completely different. There was a man I once heard about who had grown up watching his father work 2 jobs and still struggle. The lesson he absorbed, not chosen, just absorbed. The way a child absorbs everything was that working hard was what good people did, and that financial comfort was something that happened to other people, luckier people, people who were somehow different. He carried that lesson into his adult life without ever examining it. He worked hard. He was honest. He made decent money at various points. But every time he got close to a financial position that felt genuinely stable, something would happen, a decision, a spend, a choice he couldn't quite explain afterward that brought him back to familiar ground. He didn't realize until much later that the familiar ground he kept returning to was not bad luck. It was a belief he had never questioned running the show from underneath. In today's economic climate, poverty consciousness is being fed on an industrial scale. Social media shows you simultaneously the extreme wealth of a tiny minority and the financial anxiety of the majority. Financial news cycles between crisis and cautious optimism so rapidly that forming a stable, hopeful relationship with the future feels almost naive. Debt is normalized. Struggle is aestheticized. And in the middle of all of it, the individual mind, your mind, is trying to figure out where it stands and what is possible. Hill's warning was not about the external economy. It was about what the external economy does to the internal one if you let it. The reframe is this: poverty consciousness is not a personality trait. It is not proof that you lack ambition or intelligence or deserve less. It is a conditioned pattern of thought absorbed from environment and experience, and it can be unconditioned. Not easily, not overnight, but deliberately, with the right understanding of what you are actually dealing with. So take a moment, just a moment, and ask yourself, without judgment, what do I actually believe is financially possible for me? Not what you hope, not what you wish. What do you believe in your bones on an ordinary Tuesday when no one is watching? Here is something Hill said that tends to stop people mid-breath when they first encounter it. He wrote that thoughts are things and that they have the capacity to influence material reality in ways that most people systematically underestimate. He was not speaking loosely or poetically. He was making a functional claim about how the human mind operates and how that operation produces concrete results in the real world. This is not financial advice. This is a lens through which to think more clearly about the world around you. But it is a lens that Hill believed most people never pick up. Because most people, when they think about why they are in their current financial position, look outward. The economy, the boss, the timing, the circumstances. And while those things are real, while external conditions genuinely matter, Hill's warning was that the person who looks only outward will never locate the most powerful lever available to them, because that lever is internal. It is the quality, the consistency, and the direction of their habitual thinking about money. Hill described the mind as a broadcasting and receiving station. What you broadcast through your dominant thoughts, your expectations, your emotional relationship with the idea of wealth, you also attract into your orbit. Not magically, mechanically. A mind broadcasting scarcity notices scarcity. A mind broadcasting possibility notices possibility. Both minds are looking at the same world. They do not see the same things. Imagine two people walking through the same city on the same day. One is carrying the invisible weight of the belief that financial security is not really for people like them. The other is carrying an equally invisible conviction that there are always opportunities for those who are paying attention. They walk the same streets. They encounter the same storefronts, the same conversations, the same passing moments. But what each one notices, what registers as meaningful, as worth pursuing, as possible, is filtered so differently by their inner state that they might as well be in different cities. There was a woman I once read about who had worked in the same industry for 12 years, always competent, always reliable, always passed over when the bigger opportunities appeared. She had told herself a story and believed it completely, that the people who got ahead were the ones who were better connected or more aggressive or just luckier. Then something shifted in her, not her skill level, not her network, not significantly. What shifted was her quiet inner expectation of what she was allowed to want and allowed to have. She started pursuing things she had previously pre-rejected on behalf of people who hadn't even had the chance to say no. Within 2 years, her financial picture looked genuinely different. Same industry, same general circumstances, different inner broadcast. The modern economy rewards a specific kind of boldness, not recklessness, but the willingness to act as if the outcome you want is a reasonable possibility. People who carry poverty consciousness often pre-fail. They don't apply for the position. They don't raise the rate. They don't pitch the idea. They decide in advance on behalf of a future they haven't lived yet that the answer is no. And then they look at the result, the unchanged financial position, the same ceiling, and take it as confirmation that they were right. If you are sitting with something uncomfortable right now, a recognition, a quiet, that's me, you are in exactly the right place. That discomfort is not a verdict. It is the beginning of something different. And if this is landing with any weight for you, if something here is shaking something loose, consider that there are people in your life who are carrying this exact same weight without the words to describe it. A gentle share might be the thing that changes the conversation they have been having with themselves for years. Hill's work on the psychology of wealth drew heavily on what he observed in the people he studied, and one of the patterns he found most striking was the role of what he called a burning desire, not a casual wish, not a vague hope that things would be better. A specific, emotionally alive, deeply personal vision of a financial reality that the person could feel as vividly as something they had already lived. Hill believed, and this is the part that most people intellectually accept, but emotionally never actually do that desire, properly cultivated and consistently held, functions as a kind of mental instruction that the subconscious mind receives and begins to act upon. Not through mysticism, through the simple but profound fact that a mind with a clear financial target thinks differently, notices differently, prioritizes differently, and makes different micro decisions every day than a mind drifting in vague financial dissatisfaction. The desire, as Hill described it, had to be specific. Not, I want more money, but a precise figure attached to a precise timeline, connected to a precise purpose that mattered enough to generate real emotional heat. Vagueness, he believed, was one of poverty consciousness's most effective allies. You cannot move deliberately toward a destination you have never clearly named. Think of it like navigation. A ship without a destination uses whatever wind is blowing to decide direction. Sometimes that wind takes it somewhere interesting. More often, it just drifts. But a ship with coordinates, a clear destination, a plotted course, uses the same wind completely differently. The wind hasn't changed. The ship's relationship to the wind has. I once heard about a young man who had spent his 20s in genuine financial chaos, not from extravagance, but from a complete absence of any financial intention. He earned money and spent it. He made more and spent more. Not carelessly in any dramatic way, just without direction. Someone asked him once what he was trying to build financially. He had no answer, not because he was unintelligent, but because the question had genuinely never occurred to him as something that required an answer. He had assumed that financial life just happened, that you worked, and things either worked out or they didn't, and that was more or less it. The day he sat down and wrote specifically with a timeline, with a purpose, what he was actually building toward, something changed in the texture of his daily choices gradually. Then unmistakably, in the world we live in right now, vague financial dissatisfaction is the default state for an enormous number of people. They know they want something different. They cannot tell you with any precision what that different thing looks like, what it costs, how they would know they had arrived. And so they stay in motion without direction, working, spending, worrying, scrolling through someone else's financial highlight reel and mistaking motion for progress. Hill's warning about thoughts keeping you poor includes this: A mind without a specific financial destination is not a neutral thing. It is a mind that will default to whatever it has been conditioned to expect. And for most people, that conditioning points toward limitation. The reflection here is gentle but important. Do you have a financial destination? A real one, specific, dated, felt? Or are you moving without coordinates, trusting the wind? There is a chapter in Hill's thinking that makes some people deeply uncomfortable, and it is the one about environment. Specifically, the claim that the people you surround yourself with are not just influencing your mood or your social experience. They are influencing in very concrete ways your financial ceiling. Hill observed that the people who broke out of poverty consciousness almost always did so with the help of a changed environment, new conversations, new associations, new reference points for what was normal and possible. He was not saying to abandon people who are struggling. He was making a more nuanced point, that your dominant social environment sets a kind of gravitational field around your expectations. And expectations, as he had established, are not passive. They are generative. He described the idea of the mastermind, a group of people aligned around a shared purpose whose combined intelligence and energy and expectation creates something greater than any one of them could produce alone. The principle behind it is not simply that two heads are better than one. It is that the emotional and mental climate of a group shapes what its members believe is achievable. And what they believe is achievable shapes what they pursue. And what they pursue shapes what they produce. Think of it like altitude. The higher you go, the different the air. The plants that grow at sea level cannot grow at 10,000 feet, not because they are inferior, but because the conditions are different. Human ambition and financial expectation work in a similar way. At a certain altitude of expectation and association, ideas that would have felt impossible at a lower altitude begin to feel merely difficult. And difficult is workable. There was a woman I once heard described who grew up in an environment where talking about money, wanting more of it, pursuing it, building it, was considered slightly shameful, greedy. Somehow, the unspoken rule was that decent people worked for what they needed and didn't reach for more than their station. She carried that rule into her professional life without ever being told it explicitly. It just lived in her in the way she undercharged for her services, the way she deflected compliments about her talent, the way she made herself smaller in rooms full of opportunity. When she found, almost by accident, a community of people for whom financial ambition was not shameful but celebrated, where building wealth was treated as something responsible people did for themselves and the people they loved, her own permission structure shifted. She didn't change her values. She changed the air she was breathing. Today, the social environment most people inhabit is financially confusing. Wealth is simultaneously glamorized and resented. Ambition is praised and mocked depending on who is doing it and who is watching. The messaging around money is so contradictory that building a stable, healthy, expansive relationship with it almost requires going out of your way to find the right kind of conversation. But the right conversation is available. And finding it, choosing it, seeking it out is an act of genuine self-determination. Hill's point was not that environment is destiny. It was that environment is influence. And influence, understood and chosen rather than absorbed by default, is something you have far more control over than you might currently believe. Underneath everything Hill taught about the financial mind, there is one idea that ties it all together, and it is the most personal, most private, and most consistently avoided of all of them. He called it self-suggestion or auto-suggestion. And in the context of why your thoughts might be keeping you poor, it is the mechanism at the heart of everything. Hill believed that every person is constantly suggesting things to themselves, not consciously, not deliberately in most cases, but constantly. Every time you look at a bill and feel a particular feeling, every time you see a price and have a particular thought, every time you imagine the future and the image that arises is colored by a particular emotional tone, those reactions, repeated enough times, become instructions to the subconscious, and the subconscious, indifferent, faithful, utterly literal, simply acts on what it is consistently given. The poverty mindset in Hill's framework is not a character flaw. It is an autosuggestion program that has been running for a long time, often since childhood, fed by observation and experience and the emotional conclusions drawn from both. The way out is not to feel bad about the program. The way out is to consciously, deliberately, and consistently install a different one. This sounds simple. It is not easy because the old program is familiar and the subconscious is conservative by nature. It prefers the known. A new autosuggestion feels false at first because it is contradicting something that has been repeated for years. The feeling of falseness is not a sign that the new idea is wrong. It is a sign that the old program is resisting, and resistance, as anyone who has ever tried to change a habit knows, is actually the confirmation that change is happening. There was a man I once heard about who had tried every practical financial strategy available, budgets, investment accounts, income streams, and kept failing in the same subtle ways. He would start strong and then self-sabotage just before the breakthrough. A business mentor eventually pointed out that he talked about money with a particular kind of anxiety that no spreadsheet would fix. He began paying attention to the inner commentary, the voice that said, "This won't last." Every time things went well, the voice that said, "People like me don't keep money," every time he made progress. He started deliberately and consistently telling himself something different, not lying to himself, not forcing cheerfulness, just consistently, calmly choosing to end the internal conversation with a different conclusion. The outer results over time followed. Not all at once, but they followed. Hill's warning, why your thoughts are keeping you poor, was not a condemnation. It was an act of extraordinary respect for the human being receiving it. Because the warning implies something enormous, that you are not a passive victim of your financial circumstances, that the mind you carry is an instrument of remarkable power, and that if your thoughts have been keeping you poor, the same instrument redirected can do something else entirely. And so we come back to where we began, to that quiet, dangerous thought. Maybe this is just how it is for people like me. We began by naming it as the thing to be wary of. But here, at the end of this journey, there is a profound reversal worth sitting with. That thought, the one that whispers limitation, that rehearses scarcity, that pre-fails on your behalf, is not actually your enemy. It is a signal. It is your mind doing exactly what minds do, pointing at the pattern that has been running underneath everything. And a pattern you can see is a pattern you can change. The thought that has been keeping you poor is also, in the moment you recognize it for what it is, the very thing that begins to set you free. Napoleon Hill spent decades delivering this warning, not to shame people, but to hand them something. The understanding that the financial life you want is not being withheld by the universe, or by the economy, or by your past, or by the family you came from. It is being shaped every single day by the quality of thought you are willing to invest in your own future. And that, unlike so many things, is something you can work with starting today. This is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of a different relationship with your own mind, one that, if you are willing to stay with it, will keep revealing things that matter. If continuing to explore these ideas feels like something worth doing, you already know where to find the next chapter. The journey doesn't require a click. It requires only the decision to keep going. Because the mind that is ready to think differently about wealth, that mind is already changed.